Hi, I'm Michael, and my partner is Aparna, and we're doing part 2-1, Reconstruction. So our question is, assess the validity of the statement. Reconstruction, 1865 to 1877, represented America's great failed opportunity to erase racism and racial hierarchy. Because of our nation's economic, social, political, including constitutional failures during this time period, we had to wait another 100 years to raise hierarchy in America. Just before we jump into this, I'll disclose that we think that the statement is valid.
Some of the social failures during the Reconstruction era that failed to remove racial hierarchy were black codes. Even though the 13th Amendment abolished slavery, there were black codes. The black codes limited basic civil and economic rights of black people. Mississippi was the first state to start black codes. Some example of black codes are laws barred black people from carrying weapons, marrying whites, assembling in groups, serving on juries, and pursuing any occupation other than agricultural work. Civil Rights Act of 1866. The Congress passed Civil Rights Act of 1866 declaring that black people should have the same rights as white people. At first, it was vetoed by President Johnson, but Republicans overrode the veto. 15th Amendment. It was ratified on February 3, 1870. This forbade the government or states from denying citizens the right to vote on the basis of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. The Redeemer governments used literacy tests and poll taxes to evade the amendment. Civil Rights Act of 1875. Civil Rights Act of 1875 guaranteed black people full and equal enjoyment of public facilities. Southern towns and companies began to enact Jim Crow laws, which mandated racial segregation in public facilities. Even though so many amendments and laws were created, 2 centuries of slavery created racial prejudice that laws could not remove. The South hated Republicans that repealed black codes and guaranteed rights to black people. The KKK, or the Ku Klux Klan. The Klan originated in Tennessee in 1866. It quickly spread across South. The Klan wanted to maintain white supremacy by reviving the Democratic Party and overthrowing Republicans. Anonymous Klansmen dressed in white robes burned black homes, schools, and churches. They committed hundreds of murders. The Klan lynched as many as 400 African Americans between 1868 to 1871. Some political failures were radical Reconstruction. This was a term by the South for the Reconstruction era, and radical indicated Republicans. Redeemers were Democratic Party leaders because they redeemed or saved the region from Republican rule. They supported the policy to restore a social system based on white supremacy. The KKK's terror worked. Political intimidation and violence helped weaken Republican governments. By 1876, Democrats replaced Republicans as governors and legislators in 8 of 11 former Confederate states. South Carolina, Louisiana, and Florida remained under Republican control. End of radical Republicans. As radical Republicans were driven out of office or died, sympathy for freedmen also began to die because the radical Republicans were the driving force for the program to reconstruct the South. New generations in office focused on Western expansion, Indian wars, and other issues. President Grant, the next president, showed little enthusiasm for Reconstruction. His administration was stuck in scandals. The Compromise of 1877. Democrats agreed to support Hayes during the presidential election of 1876. In return, Hayes and Republicans agreed to withdraw all federal troops from the South and appoint at least one Southerner to the cabinet and grant funds for internal improvements in the South. The impact of the compromise. Republican governments in Louisiana and South Carolina collapsed as Southern Democrats proclaimed to return to home rule and white supremacy.
Economic failure. In the famous court case of Plessy v. Ferguson, the government made segregation legal. This was terrible for black people because they were not given equality in the economy, because they were discriminated against, as in they could not take the same actions or participate in the same way that a white person could. And in many cases, they were second class and they had to go second or give up their seat or things like that. And it also made price gouging legal. Also, anti-unionism was a thing in the South. These things called yellow dog contracts existed, where employers would give these to their employees, and they signed it with their name and where they live. And if that person quit, then they would be blacklisted within the community, and they would struggle to find another job in the area. Also, corrupt judges and thugs would not let, or corrupt judges would be unfair to black people when tried for unions, and thugs would, beat them up if they were in a union. Freedmen's Bureau. This was set up to give aid to all poor people affected by the Civil War, but it was mostly intended for black people. And so this department, which is part of the Department of War, bought land that was previously part of a plantation and sold it to former slaves. The problem was they had problems with funding, and they never really bought that much land. And also, the employees were harassed by the KKK and were involved in murders and stuff. It was repealed in 1866, but had a lot of problems with states' rights and stuff, and it was eventually canceled in 1870. This is what replaced, or William Tecumseh Sherman, general in the Civil War, had the Sherman's Field Order 15, which promised 40 acres and a mule to every black male, I think. And that never happened. This was meant to replace it, and even that failed. The Black Codes. Following the new government set up in the South, basically all the people elected or put in position were white, and they tried everything they could to make the lives of black people worse. And some of them, they made these like small laws called the Black Codes, and they involved outlawing white people giving charity or aid. I think a slur to these people would be carpetbaggers. And then they put in literacy tests, so black people had problems voting. They allowed or they encouraged price gouging and exorbitant rates, which kept black people in debt for generations. And they had labor contracts, which if black people quit their job or moved, then they would be penalized by law, which, well, white people didn't have to do that, so it's not fair. The Depression of 1873 to 78. So during the last 2 years of the Civil War, the North experienced its highest production rates that it had ever experienced, and this followed after the war. And because of this, the economy grew, but no new notes were produced, or at least not enough. So this deflated the currency, and this made paying off debts a lot harder, especially for black people. Um, and so because of this, it was hard to keep a small farm or their own business, so blacks would be employed by their former masters, actually, and they would sharecrop, which is it's basically feudalism, where they would work on another person's land, and they would get about 1/3 the actual share of what they'd pick, and obviously they couldn't save any money, and also the money that they did make was basically stolen by people in the area, because they would price gouge and stuff like that, and people had so few money that they couldn't travel away to get a better job. As for the validity of the statement, Aparna and I both agree that it is completely valid. The government-wise, there were 3 chances that the government had to make things equal, which was the 14th Amendment, the Civil Rights Act of 1866, and the Civil Rights Act of 1875. And neither of the 3 made things completely equal. They were all small steps, or were marred by different things like the black codes or whatever. And it's true that things weren't fully equal until 1964. And that's what Aparna and I believe. And yeah.